Torah life ministries come out of the world. Messiah people see.
When we hear the words an eye for an eye, automatically we think, well, if you take my eye out, I got to take your eye out. And that's not a righteous or holy creator, because he's forgiving and he would never have us take a limb for a limb or something like this. Well, we have to understand the principle of Scripture. And it's not about a little kid being murdered for being disobedient to his parent, or a guy being murdered for picking up a stick on Shabbat. And it's not about restitution of somebody taking a limb because somebody lost a limb. It was the creation of two things. One of them was a monetary system. And if an eye was lost, well, with the idea of slavery back then, a slave with no eye was only worth a certain amount. And they would distinguish that to determine the monetary amount of what that would be. And that's what that slave or that person that lost the eye was, in essence, required. It wasn't like if he took his eye out, so now he's going to take his eye out. So that's one principle we have to understand of Scripture. Things were starting to be established, and a monetary system was starting to be established. Prior to the children going into slavery in Egypt, where it was an equal slate, there was no one person had more money than another person, and one person could buy something that another person can't. They were all slaves, and everyone was a slave in Egypt. So slavery wasn't a Hebrew concept or something that a creator made up. What he did was he ended up putting rules to slavery, and everyone was no longer on this clean slate and on the same level or anything else. And so we look at the idea of slavery, and we think about slavery today, and this is where a big problem happens, because today people look at slavery and they just think automatically to a slave. You got the African slaves, and then you have human trafficking today and sex slavery and all this other stuff. So the connotation of the word slavery today is very negative. But when you look at it from a scriptural standpoint and what our Creator was doing and why he was doing it and how he was doing it in his establishment of some form of order, and we look at the idea of slavery from that point, it's almost closer to the system of slavery that's happening on an everyday basis today, that we can understand more clearly, and we don't look at it with horror, and that is the system of employment. In essence, today, employer is a slave to the place he's employed to, or an employee is a slave to the employer. Meaning, if you do this, you're going to get this, and if you don't do this, you're not going to get that. If you want to go free, well, here's your rules of how to be set free. But if you make the decision, or you sign the contract, or you make a covenant to be working here for a certain amount of time, this is the consequences, or this is what it's going to be. So, there were rules or establishments around this idea of slavery. But I think slavery is a very poor choice of words when we consider the way things are done today, or the way history has taken this and made it into such a negative thing. So we have to get beyond the idea of slavery, to really understand what our Creator says and does. And, it's for our protection more than anything, the system of slavery. And to give you an example of that, we could look at our lives and say we were once slaves to sin, which we were slaves to the system in Egypt. All right, the system of bondage of the enemy, or the evil side, or the evil one. But now we turn that around, and we say we're slaves to the slaves to God, or the slaves to him, which is the system of Yeshua, the system of Yahweh. He said, I once was a slave to sin, now I'm a slave to Yahweh, slave to God, and this kind of idea. And we look at also slavery. We could look at the idea of Yeshua, himself, who died for us, innocently. So if you want to do away with the whole idea of slavery and restitution and everything else, there's no reasonable answer why another human being should die for our sin and die for us. And that expresses and shows who Yeshua was and what he did for us in dying for us and taking death upon him for us. And I just think in a renewed covenant, when he says, I'm going to be, it says, slaves, treat your servants a certain way. It's not about condemning the system of slavery that is known to us today. It's about understanding that whatever position that our Creator has put us in, we need to do our best to live as close to the guidelines and instructions of our Creator as possible. And as we're righteous, then our reward will not be here on earth, but in heaven. So that's what we need to understand and the guideline we need to get.
Out of the world, oh my people, seek the truth, avoid the evil, learn Yahweh's ways. Torah life ministries come out of the world.